Imagine opening your eyes after a terrible accident in ancient Rome. Your leg is crushed beneath a fallen cart, blood is running into the dirt, and a crowd gathers around you. Then someone says the words that every Roman dreaded hearing. "A doctor is coming." Today, those words would bring relief. 2,000 years ago, they often meant the exact opposite. There were no painkillers, no antibiotics, no understanding of bacteria, and almost no way to stop infection once it started. A Roman doctor might save your life, but he might also cut off the wrong limb, spread disease with filthy tools, or leave you screaming while assistants pinned you to the ground. In ancient Rome, war was dangerous, slavery was brutal, but many ordinary people feared the doctor just as much as death itself. The strange thing is that Rome was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Its roads stretched across continents. Massive aqueducts carried water for miles. Enormous arenas and towering temples amazed visitors from every corner of the empire. But medicine lagged behind. Romans could build a bridge that survived for centuries, yet they had almost no idea why people became sick. Many believed disease came from angry gods, evil spirits, curses, or poisonous air drifting through the streets. A fever could be blamed on bad luck. A seizure might be seen as possession. A child dying overnight could be explained by supernatural forces. Without understanding the true cause, treatments often became terrifying experiments. Unlike modern doctors, Roman physicians did not always receive years of careful education. In fact, many of them had no formal training at all. Some were former slaves from Greece who happened to know a little about herbs. Others learned by watching another doctor work for a few months. Wealthy families might hire a personal physician, but poor citizens often depended on wandering healers who carried mysterious bottles and promised miracles. If one treatment failed and the patient died, there was usually no investigation. No medical license would be revoked. No hospital board would ask questions. The dead could not complain. A Roman doctor's tools would look more like the equipment of a blacksmith than a healer. Iron hooks, bronze scalpels, bone saws, heavy forceps, sharp needles, metal probes. Many of these instruments were surprisingly sophisticated, but there was one enormous problem. They were rarely sterilized in any meaningful way. A doctor could spend the morning cutting into an infected wound, wipe the blade on a dirty cloth, and use the same instrument on the next patient. Blood, pus, and invisible bacteria traveled from body to body without anyone understanding what was happening. The doctor believed he was helping. The patient often never recovered. Pain was perhaps the greatest terror. Modern surgery depends on anesthesia, but ancient Rome had almost nothing that truly blocked pain. Some physicians used strong wine. Others gave mixtures containing opium or crushed plants that could dull the senses. Yet these remedies were unpredictable. Too little and the patient felt everything. Too much and the patient might never wake up. Most surgeries happened while several strong men held the victim down. The screams echoed through homes, military camps, and crude treatment rooms. Bones were cut, flesh was opened, and arrows were pulled from bodies while the patient remained fully conscious. Many Romans believed dying quickly was kinder than surviving the operation. Battlefields created some of the busiest doctors in the empire. Roman legions marched thousands of miles, fighting brutal campaigns across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Soldiers returned with crushed skulls, broken ribs, deep spear wounds, and limbs nearly torn apart. Military doctors became skilled through constant practice, but even they faced impossible odds. Dirt filled open wounds. Flies covered the injured. Infection spread faster than any enemy army. A soldier who survived the battle might die several days later from fever and rot. The blade that struck him was often less dangerous than the treatment that followed. The average Roman family had very few options when sickness entered the home. A child developed a cough that would not stop. A mother grew weak after giving birth. An old grandfather suddenly collapsed. Should they call a doctor? Many families hesitated. Hearing a physician could cost money they desperately needed. Worse, the treatment itself might make the illness even more severe. Some people preferred prayers at local temples. Others trusted old family remedies passed down for generations. Honey, vinegar, herbs, animal fat, and strange rituals were often chosen over professional medicine. For countless Romans, doing nothing felt safer than calling for help. One of the greatest dangers was bloodletting. Doctors believed that the human body contained different fluids called humors. If these fluids became unbalanced, illness appeared. The solution seemed obvious to them. Remove blood. A physician might slice open a vein and allow large amounts to pour into a bowl. Weak patients became weaker. Dehydrated people lost even more fluids. Some fainted immediately. Today we know that many diseases have nothing to do with excess blood, but Roman doctors believed they were restoring balance to the body. Sometimes the treatment killed the patient long before the original sickness could. Surgery was not the only frightening part of Roman medicine. Diagnosis itself could be bizarre. Some doctors studied the color of urine in glass containers. Others smelled wounds or examined stool. Certain healers believed dreams contained clues about disease. Astrologers connected illness to the movement of stars across the night sky. A patient with stomach pain might receive herbs. Another might receive a prayer. A third could be told that an angry god demanded sacrifice. Medicine and superstition lived side by side, and nobody truly knew which path would work. For ordinary people, trusting a doctor often felt like gambling with their lives. Yet despite all these horrors, people still became doctors. Some wanted wealth, others sought fame. A few genuinely wished to heal the suffering. They walked through the crowded streets of Rome carrying leather bags filled with blades, powders, and mysterious medicines. Behind them followed a reputation built on fear. Because every Roman understood one brutal truth. If you were lucky, the doctor might save you. If you were unlucky, the doctor would become the last person you ever saw. And perhaps the darkest part of all was this. Many of the most horrifying medical procedures in ancient Rome were not used on dying people. They were performed on patients who might have survived without them. For most Romans, the greatest fear was not getting sick. It was surviving long enough for the doctor to arrive. A deep cut, a shattered arm, or a swollen infection could quickly turn into a nightmare. The physician would kneel beside the patient, touch the wound, and quietly order his assistants to hold the victim down. There was no gentle explanation. No comforting promise. Only cold metal, rough hands, and the understanding that whatever happened next was going to hurt more than the injury itself. Sometimes the patient begged to be left alone. Sometimes nobody listened. Broken bones were incredibly common in ancient Rome. Construction accidents, wagon crashes, tavern fights, military service, and collapsing apartment buildings left thousands with fractured limbs every year. Roman doctors knew that bones had to be set correctly, but doing so meant pulling them back into place by force. Several assistants would grab the patient, while another pulled the injured arm or leg until the bones aligned. The sound of snapping joints and human screams filled the room. If the bone pierced the skin, the danger became far worse. Infection was often waiting. Ancient Roman cities were filthy places. Garbage piled in narrow streets, animal waste mixed with mud, dead rats rotted in gutters, public toilets overflowed, and flies landed on everything. Now imagine falling into that filth with an open wound. Doctors understood that dirty injuries were dangerous, but they did not know why. Some washed wounds with wine or vinegar, believing the liquids had magical cleansing powers. Others packed cuts with herbs, ashes, or strange mixtures of oil and crushed plants. Occasionally, these treatments helped. Many times, they trapped dirt inside the body and made the infection spread even faster. One of the most horrifying procedures was amputation. If a limb turned black from infection or was crushed beyond repair, the doctor might decide there was only one solution. Cut it off. The patient was given strong wine, perhaps a little opium if available, and then several men held him still. A blade sliced through skin. The saw bit into bone. The victim screamed until his voice disappeared. If he survived the blood loss, the wound itself could still become infected within days. Many Romans believed the operation was little more than a slower form of execution. Burning was another favorite tool of Roman medicine. Physicians often used heated iron rods to seal wounds and stop bleeding. The process was called cauterization. The metal was placed into a fire until it glowed red. Then it was pressed directly against living flesh. The smell of burning skin filled the air. Doctors considered this one of their greatest achievements because it could prevent massive blood loss. In some cases, they were right. But for the patient, the cure felt almost worse than the injury itself. Even hardened soldiers dreaded seeing the hot iron prepared. Eye surgery may have been the most terrifying experience of all. Cataracts were common, especially among older Romans. Doctors developed a procedure that involved pushing a sharp needle directly into the eye. The cloudy lens was forced downward, away from the center of vision. If everything went perfectly, the patient might see shapes again. If anything went wrong, blindness was permanent. The patient remained awake during the entire operation. One wrong movement, one sudden flinch, a lifetime of darkness. Roman doctors were also expected to remove arrows, spearheads, and other weapons from wounded soldiers. The challenge was that pulling the object straight out often caused even greater damage. Some physicians designed special forceps that could grip the metal and slowly extract it. Others enlarged the wound with a knife before reaching inside. Blood poured across the floor. The patient clenched his teeth. The doctor searched blindly beneath layers of flesh, hoping to find the hidden point before the man bled to death. Skill mattered. Luck mattered even more. Not every treatment involved knives. Many Roman medicines were strange enough to frighten modern people. Patients swallowed crushed minerals, animal organs, tree sap, moldy bread, and powdered plants collected from distant provinces. Some remedies actually contained useful natural chemicals. Others were completely useless. A few were deadly. Because there was no scientific testing, every new mixture became an experiment performed on desperate people. If the patient recovered, the doctor claimed success. If the patient died, the illness was blamed instead. Childbirth was one of the moments when Roman doctors were most desperately needed and most deeply feared. Complicated births often became disasters. Without modern surgery or sterile conditions, both mother and baby faced terrible odds. Doctors sometimes reached inside the womb with metal hooks and primitive instruments to pull the child free. Ancient medical writers described these procedures with shocking calmness, but for the families watching, it was pure horror. Many women never survived difficult labor. Many doctors could do little except watch and hope. Perhaps the cruelest truth about Roman medicine was that doctors were not evil. Most genuinely believed they were helping. They inherited old Greek theories, copied ancient texts, and trusted methods passed down by generations before them. They had courage enough to face blood, disease, and death every single day. But courage could not replace knowledge. Without understanding infection, bacteria, or anatomy as we know it today, even the best physician often became an unwitting executioner. And while ordinary Romans feared the doctor's knife, there was one place where medicine became even darker: the arena. Because in ancient Rome, the people who suffered the most brutal injuries were expected to survive, not for mercy, but so they could fight again. If there was one place where Roman doctors gained real experience, it was not inside quiet homes or wealthy villas. It was the arena. Thousands of spectators packed enormous amphitheaters to watch men tear each other apart for entertainment. Swords slashed through flesh, tridents pierced shoulders, and heavy clubs shattered bones. When the fighting stopped, the dead were dragged away. But the wounded were often carried to a small room beneath the arena, where doctors waited with their instruments. Their job was not kindness. Their job was to make sure the next show could happen. A successful gladiator was incredibly valuable. Training a fighter took years, and feeding him was expensive. Owners did not want their investments dying from injuries that could be treated. Because of this, gladiator doctors sometimes became the finest physicians in the empire. They learned how deep a wound could be before it became fatal. They learned how to stop bleeding quickly. They learned where to cut and where never to cut. Ironically, the men who practiced medicine in the bloodiest place in Rome often had the most practical knowledge. But even they could not escape the limits of ancient science. Infection remained their greatest enemy. Imagine a gladiator collapsing after taking a sword through the thigh. The crowd roars while slaves carry him underground. The doctor immediately examines the wound. Blood is pouring onto the stone floor. The blade may have missed the main artery, or it may have sliced halfway through it. There is no X-ray, no ultrasound, no modern equipment. The physician must decide within seconds whether to dig into the wound or leave it alone. A wrong choice means death. Sometimes the doctor never even discovers what went wrong until the body grows cold. Roman medical writers left behind descriptions of battlefield and arena injuries that still sound shocking today. A spear embedded in the chest. A jaw split open by an axe. A shoulder nearly severed. Doctors reached into open wounds with bronze hooks and forceps, searching for broken weapon fragments hidden inside flesh. The patient remained awake, shaking from pain and blood loss. If the weapon had barbs, pulling it out could tear even more tissue. Sometimes the doctor had to cut a larger hole simply to remove the object. The treatment often looked as violent as the injury itself. The arena also taught doctors something strange. The human body could survive unbelievable punishment. Ancient accounts describe gladiators fighting after losing fingers, suffering deep cuts across the face, or taking wounds that would send a modern person into immediate shock. Physicians observed these survivors carefully. They began to understand that some parts of the body could be injured without causing instant death, while damage to certain hidden places almost always proved fatal. It was not true anatomy in the modern sense. It was knowledge purchased with endless suffering. Outside the arena, another group desperately needed doctors. The slaves. Millions of slaves lived throughout the Roman Empire, working in fields, mines, homes, and construction sites. Their lives were harsh and injuries happened constantly. A wealthy owner might call a physician if an expensive slave became sick. But cheaper workers were often abandoned. If treatment cost more than replacement, some owners simply bought another slave. For many of the poorest people in the empire, medical care was not a right. It was a financial calculation. Mining slaves suffered some of the worst conditions imaginable. Deep underground, they breathed dust every day, their lungs slowly filled with tiny particles that made breathing painful. Heavy rocks crushed limbs. Tunnel collapses buried entire groups alive. Doctors could do almost nothing for these workers. A broken arm might heal crooked. A crushed leg might be amputated. A damaged lung was simply accepted as fate. Many slaves died young not because nobody knew they were suffering, but because nobody had the knowledge to save them. Even wealthy Romans could not escape the dangers of disease. A rich senator might own a private physician, imported from Greece and paid enormous sums of money. His house would be cleaner than the streets outside. His food would be better. His medicines would be more expensive. Yet when plague swept through the city, wealth often meant very little. Doctors watched entire families develop fever after fever without understanding how sickness spread. They prayed. They burned incense. They mixed herbs. But invisible enemies moved through Rome untouched by all their efforts. Perhaps the greatest weakness of Roman medicine was something doctors could not even imagine. They never washed their hands because they did not know they should. A physician could examine one infected patient, then immediately touch another without cleaning himself. Blood stained his fingers. Pus dried beneath his nails. His instruments carried invisible armies from body to body. Today we know about bacteria and viruses. The Romans knew nothing about them. One of the empire's greatest civilizations was unknowingly fighting an enemy too small to see. And that ignorance killed countless people. By the 2nd century, some doctors had earned legendary reputations. Men like Galen treated emperors and wrote enormous medical texts that would influence Europe for more than 1,000 years. He carefully studied wounds, muscles, and bones, often by examining injured gladiators. His observations were remarkable for the time. But even Galen believed many ideas that were completely wrong. The greatest doctor in Rome still did not understand germs. He still trusted the theory of bodily humors. He still worked in a world where surgery happened without true anesthesia. And for ordinary Romans, that meant one terrible reality remained unchanged. The closer you came to the doctor's table, the more likely you were to discover that surviving the illness was only the beginning of your nightmare. For all their fear, Romans could never completely avoid doctors. Everyone eventually became sick. A child developed a fever that would not break, a merchant fell from his horse, a soldier returned home carrying wounds that refused to heal, a wealthy noble suddenly collapsed during dinner. Sooner or later, someone had to make a decision. Do we call the physician? Many families waited until the last possible moment. They prayed first, they visited temples, they burned incense for the gods and offered sacrifices. The doctor was often the final option, and by then it was sometimes already too late. Roman homes themselves created endless opportunities for injury. Most ordinary people lived inside crowded apartment buildings called insulae. Many were built quickly and cheaply, rising several stories above narrow streets. Staircases collapsed. Balconies gave way. Heavy objects fell from upper windows. A single accident could leave someone with broken ribs, crushed legs, or severe head injuries. The doctor would arrive carrying his leather bag of instruments. The family hoped for a miracle. Instead, they often watched as pain, blood loss, and infection slowly claimed the victim. Ancient Rome was dangerous long before anyone reached the battlefield. Even something as simple as a toothache could become a nightmare. Without modern dentistry, small cavities often turned into deadly infections. Roman doctors and dentists used metal forceps to pull damaged teeth directly from the jaw. There were no injections, no numbing medicine. The patient sat in a chair while assistants held his head still. The forceps grabbed the tooth. The doctor twisted. If the root broke, the procedure became even worse. Fragments had to be dug out piece by piece while blood filled the patient's mouth. Some people chose to endure years of agony rather than face the extraction. The elderly suffered perhaps the most silent form of misery. Arthritis twisted joints. Eyes clouded with cataracts. Hearing faded. Simple falls broke fragile bones. Roman medicine had almost no answer for growing old. Doctors prescribed warm baths, herbal mixtures, massages, and special diets. Sometimes they recommended strange potions made from animal parts or rare plants. Nothing truly stopped the body from failing. Old age itself was treated like an illness without a cure. Many elderly Romans simply accepted pain as a permanent companion. Plagues brought out the helplessness of Roman medicine more than anything else. Entire neighborhoods could fall ill within days. People developed high fevers, coughed endlessly, and died before their families understood what was happening. Doctors rushed from house to house. They examined tongues. They checked pulses. They prescribed herbs and prayers. But they had no idea that disease could spread from person to person through invisible organisms. Ironically, the physician himself might carry the sickness from one home to the next. Trying to save lives, he unknowingly helped the plague travel farther. Some Roman doctors became extremely wealthy despite the risks. The rich paid enormous sums for famous physicians who claimed special knowledge. These men dressed well, spoke confidently, and surrounded themselves with expensive medical tools. But reputation did not always equal skill. Ancient writers joked that some doctors killed more people than wars. One Roman saying became especially famous: "The doctor only needs to make one mistake." The patient never got a second chance. Stories spread through the city about botched operations and mysterious deaths. Fear followed every physician wherever he walked. Yet history remembers a surprising truth. Roman medicine was not completely useless. Doctors recognized that clean water was important. Some wounds healed better when washed with wine or vinegar, both of which have mild antiseptic properties. Military surgeons developed techniques that occasionally saved lives. Step by step, mistake by mistake, they gathered knowledge. Many of their tools look surprisingly similar to surgical instruments used today. The tragedy was not that Roman doctors refused to learn. The tragedy was that they lived centuries before science could explain what they were seeing. They stood in darkness trying to solve problems they could barely understand. Imagine meeting one of these physicians face to face. His hands are stained from previous patients. A bronze scalpel hangs from his belt. Small jars of herbs rattle inside a leather pouch. He tells you that he can help. Would you trust him? You know he cannot stop the pain. You know he cannot prevent infection. You know there is a real chance that the treatment itself will kill you. But without him, the injury may become fatal anyway. For millions of Romans, this impossible choice was part of everyday life. Modern hospitals feel almost miraculous when compared with the ancient world. Sterile operating rooms, antibiotics, anesthesia, X-rays, vaccines. Simple cuts that once killed people now heal within days. A broken leg no longer means months of terror. A difficult childbirth is no longer a near-certain death sentence. The things we consider ordinary today would have seemed like magic to a Roman physician. Perhaps they would have believed modern doctors were gods. Or perhaps they would simply have envied them, because they spent their lives fighting death with almost nothing but courage and sharp metal. When we picture ancient Rome, we usually imagine marble temples, mighty emperors, and victorious armies. But behind that glorious image stood another Rome. A Rome where apartment buildings collapsed without warning. A Rome where public streets overflowed with filth. A Rome where disease spread through crowded neighborhoods. And a Rome where the arrival of a doctor could fill an entire family with dread. The physician was not a villain. He was simply a man trapped in an age that did not yet understand the human body. His knife was sharp. His intentions were often good. But his knowledge was painfully incomplete. And that is why, for countless ordinary people living under the shadow of the Roman Empire, hearing the words, "The doctor is here," was not a moment of hope. It was the moment they realized they might never see tomorrow.